The letter came to Castle Black at dawn, just as the wind found its new voice and began keening along the teeth of the wall. John had been walking the parapet since the small hours, warming his hands by the thought of them as much as by any glove. The battered leather on his fingers creaked when he peeled it back and pressed his palm to the blue-white surface. The cold bit cleanly. It always did. When the rookery door opened below and the raven burst into the half-light, it looked like a shred of night torn loose, flapping hard to stay in a world that did not want it. Maester Eamon did not climb the steps anymore, and John did not ask him to. The stewards bore the letter up with a look that suggested it might crack in their hands. Wax clung to the fold like a glazed scab. The seal impressed upon it was heavy and oval. The Lion of the Rock lounged across it, lazy as a summer lord. John disliked it before Eamon murmured, "The royal hand," and turned his blind face toward the sound of the wind. They opened it in the Lord Commander's chambers, though there was no lord to inhabit them now, only the scorched smell left behind by men who warmed themselves with peat and boiled wine. The shutters rattled, and the fire in the brazier hissed and bent. Ghost paced the length of the wall, sweeping it with his plume of a tail. In the leaping light his fur looked gray rather than white, and his eyes were coals pulled from a deeper pit. "Read it," John said. He stood by the arrow slit and watched the pale morning gather itself over the haunted forest, as if even the sun needed courage to climb. Eamon's voice had grown thin with the winter, a line drawn delicately across a page, but it did not tremble. He spoke the words as though he could feel their shape, and perhaps he could better than any of them. There was the preface, a courtly sweep of titles that had as little to do with the wall as roses had to do with ice. There was the king's name, boyish and new, appended at the end of a sentence about peace. There was the name that made the room contract, made Ghost pause and lift his head, made something old and dark come up through John's ribs like cold water seeking a mouth to flood. "Roose Bolton," Eamon said, and then, "Warden of the North." Ghost's breath misted in slow curls. The stewards shifted on their feet, steel whispering against scabbard leather. No one in the room coughed or laughed or swore. All the crude little comforts by which men declare themselves alive were absent. Eamon went on. The letter spoke of necessity and prudence and the safety of the realm. It said that the North had need of a known face if it was to accept new hands, that the cold would devour those who spent themselves on quarrels, and that the king had seen fit, by advice and consent of his lords, to confirm Lord Bolton's nomination of one John Snow, natural son of Eddard Stark, as Warden of the North, to act in the king's name until such time as the peril of winter should pass. "The king will have the North in a glove," said one of the stewards under his breath, not quite softly enough. He swallowed when John looked at him. "Beg pardon, do they say how the glove shall be stitched?" John asked. He kept his eyes on the forest because the forest could not lie. It offered only its quiet and its frost and the creak of old trunks under pressure, and all of that was true. "There is more," said Eamon. His thin finger traced the edge of the page. His sightless eyes lowered as if out of courtesy. "Lord Bolton speaks of provisions sent from White Harbor, at a reduced tariff for the watch, to be guaranteed if the proclamation is accepted and sworn." "To whom?" John heard the iron in his voice and wished he did not. Eamon paused, as if listening to words that had melted and lost their shape. "To you." For a long while John heard only the wind and the small movements of Ghost. He thought of the way snow erases prints by degrees, how a story is smudged until it is a silence, and only the trees remember. He thought of Father's hand on his shoulder in the Godswood at Winterfell, steady and warm, and of a voice that had always held back more than it gave. He thought of Robb, laughing in the practice yard, the two of them weaving around one another with blunted swords while Bran shouted and Arya pelted them both with fallen apples. Robb. The name made a hinge in his chest and everything swung sharply inward. "Vows do not bend at the king's pleasure," said John. "They were not made to him. The world is often made to bend without asking," Eamon murmured. The old man's face had the calm of those who can stand within fire. "I am not counsel enough for this. If I were 20 years younger, I would not be counsel enough. But I am the only maester you have, and so I will tell you what I know. The North is hurt. Hurt can make men take a hand that they would otherwise spit upon. He means to use my name, Jon said. Not even my name, my father's. He let himself taste the bitter of it, because pretending sweetness would have been worse. He thinks a bastard will be grateful to be pointed at and called true. Or he thinks a bastard can be made to heel, said the steward who had spoken before. He was a square, brown man with a gap in his teeth that gave him a look of perpetual apology. Beg pardon, Snow. I speak plain. You do, Jon said. Keep doing so. Eamon folded the letter carefully and turned it in his hands as though it were a small, sleeping thing that might startle awake. There is another letter, he said, feeling for it. From the Lord of the Dread Fort alone. Its seal. His finger found the second lump of wax. Different. Pink. The second letter stank of clean blood even before Eamon opened it. Perhaps that was fancy. The mind supplies its own odors. Spoke more plainly. There was no kneel to the king. Roose Bolton wrote with a hand that had never hurried, the ink dry as dust. He spoke of duty to the realm, of the oaths sworn by the Night's Watch to guard the kingdoms of men, and the need to set aside petty scruples when the cold came down like a hammer. He wrote that he had observed many winters and seen how men clutched at names, at banners, at any old habit that could be mistaken for safety. He wrote that Jon Snow must come to Winterfell at once, under safe conduct, to receive the fealty of such northern lords as were present, and to fix his seal to a pact of mutual aid for the duration of the season. He wrote that provisions and men would be sent to fortify the wall, under the Warden's signature authorizing their distribution. He wrote that the shorelines were not safe and that pirates and krakens took advantage of storm and flux. He wrote that disobedience would be treason to the realm. The last line was small and neat and reeked of indifference. Bring the direwolf, it said. The North loves a story. Ghost's hackles lifted, then smoothed. Jon, against his will, imagined the glossy red smile of a flayed man's banner hung beside the gray direwolf his father had flown. The two cloth faces moving in the same wind, speaking to the same eyes. Give me an hour, Jon said. No more. I'll have an answer then. He had nothing like an answer after an hour or after two. He walked the length of the wall until the cold bit bone and the bite became a help because it narrowed his world to each breath. He took Ghost into the tunnel and paced until the torch smoke seared him and his eyes watered. He went to the common hall and drank thin stew among a knot of men who pretended not to watch him, each ladling the broth with a frozen-lipped care that would have made him laugh on any other day. He went to the old storage room at the base of the East Tower where the unusable swords were stacked in a tangle, and he picked one up that had lost half its edge and two-thirds of its temper and swung it at the air until his shoulder screamed. He did not think, and that helped. When he went back to Eamon, he felt a steadiness that might have been surrender or decision or the moment before either. I'll go, he said. It is not a small thing you say. Eamon's sightless gaze stayed on him as if it could see him better for not looking at the world around him. On what terms? As a brother of the Night's Watch, Jon said. Not as a lord's tame hound. I will go, and I will hear what he means. I will take their oaths in my presence if they offer them, and I will not swear a syllable. I'll take whatever grain and iron I can seize for the wall, and if he thinks to have me, he will have to do more than name me. We must speak with Marsh, said Eamon, and with Othel Yarwick, even with Slint. The Watch will be asked to bear this with you. They'll bear it if it comes with meat, Jon said, and hated the truth of it the moment he spoke it. He had always preferred men. He did not yet know if he preferred them to what was coming down from the north. They sent a raven first, patched and pieced like a beggar's cloak, one black feather bent at the tip as if it had been pinched. Jon wrote the words himself and kept them clean as a blade. He would come under guest right. He would not lay hand to a lordship and break the vows he had sworn. He would negotiate for the Watch's sake and return once their interests were secured. He would not be paraded. If any man sought to force him to kneel, to swear, to take a cloak that was not black, he would leave without a backward glance and count it a breach of guest right that even southern kings would whisper about when they ate. The return messenger arrived on the third day, his feathers silvered and stiff with cold. John took the scrap himself from the bird's leg. The words were Roose's and no one else's. "Come," said the letter. "The north grows no lighter while we dither." The escort arrived a day after that. A trickle of men with pink and black on their sleeves and the studied blandness of killers at peace. Their leader was a narrow-chested captain with a rust-colored mustache and a voice like a stuck hinge. "Steelshanks Walton," he said. "My lord." "I am no lord," said John. "Noted," Walton said, in a tone that suggested notes were for other men. He was civil enough, and none of his men picked fights, but their eyes lingered on the cracks in the stonework with a craftsman's interest, and they stood too far from their horses as if they meant to prove they would not run. John left Castle Black with 30 brothers and 2 rattling wagons, and a third made out of a fourth by Othel's ingenuity and a length of chain. Ghost went padding ahead along the old King's Road, the dog foxes and owls holding their questions close and letting the strangers pass. New snow fell. Old Snow watched them and did not care. They slept in croft houses whose hearths were cold as graves, and in ruined towers where the stones had been levered out one by one to make shelters for small people who had no choice. A woman with a brown baby and a gray one watched them eat without saying a word and then turned her shoulder to them, as if the space between bone and skin could be some sort of wall. On the 4th night they met men coming north, wreathed in their own impatience, torsos wrapped in bearskins, hands red with the gristle and cold failings of their provisions. They were clansmen, and John took their measure the way he took the measure of a sword, heft, balance, where it would break. They did not look at Walton. They did not speak to the Boltons at all. They looked at John. One of them, very young, very old in the eyes, swallowed and said, "Snow, Snow," John returned. He did not add your lord or your warden or any of the names that were asking to be set down between them. The lad nodded once, as if a thing had been agreed, and the men moved on. Winterfell rose out of the white like a dream half-remembered and therefore more vivid. The great outer wall still pocked by the burns and batterings of the Iron Men, the inner walls with their faces scabbed, the first courtyard cleared of drifts so that men could play at bustling. Flags hung limp along the main approach, the flayed man higher than the rest, its colors too bright in the gray. Smoke went up from a dozen places. The smell was the smell of work. Dung, horses, hot iron, old ash, ale. John heard the gate lift with a chattering sound like teeth. Ghost had been ahead and now returned to his side as if he had gone to smell the future and did not much care for it. The porter who trotted alongside Walton's stirrup had a scar that took his left eyebrow and half his forehead. He kept his eyes down when he said, "Welcome, my lords," and that was how John knew the word had been put about to call him that. He did not bend his head. He did not lift it either. A man who plays at not noticing a weight is only shifting it to another muscle. He rode in and let the courtyard come up around him with the same expression he had given the white wastes. Respectful, stubborn, unwilling to pretend. Roose Bolton waited in the great hall as if he had been sitting there for an hour and would sit there for another and did not know the difference. Ramsay was not at his shoulder. 3 Freys were. John knew them for Freys by their mouths even before he saw the badges sewn with a neat woman's hand. Wyman Manderley was there as well, broader than any chair, his face as placid as a frozen pond and his eyes not placid at all. Beside him perched a sour little man in a black cloak trimmed with rabbit, with a sheaf of seals in his pocket and a blank at his nape where the hair had thinned. A Karstark stood near the far column with his jaw set. Other men John did not know filled the spaces between. Roose's eyes were nearly colorless. That had always been said of him. John had never believed it could be important until he saw a man who might as well have been a snowfield himself. The Warden of the North, so styled in every proclamation, inclined his head 1 finger's width. "Jon Snow," he said, "your father would have come more promptly." "My father is dead," John said. "I am a brother of the Night's Watch. I have come when the Watch's duties allow, and not before." He wanted the words to land like stones and make a shape on the ground that other men would have to walk around. He did not look at the Freys' faces or at Manderley's careful mouth. Roose's gaze moved, not quite blinking. The wall's duties allow much more than you pretend, he said, conversational. Guarding the realm is not always done by huddling against the wind. If you want something from me, say it plain, John answered. He could feel Ghost at his heel, not touching, the warmth of him a line of heat that did not reach the skin. I have already said it, Roose replied mildly. The North must be walked by a name that will not make men spit when it passes. The North must know that the king's peace has a face and a hand, and that the hand can lift and the face can look. You may be bastard-born, but your father's fault does not erase his successes. He taught you to hold a sword and to listen. He taught you to stand straight. I have need of a man who can stand. A puppet who stands looks very much like a man, Wyman Manderley observed gently, as if the thought had just occurred to him and he regretted the necessity of expressing it. His soft blue eyes did not move from John's face. Lord Wyman, said Roose, as if soothing a child, no one has asked you to move your lips around a word you cannot swallow. As for puppets, they do not refuse. This one has refused once already and is here to refuse again and again, and I must listen because the wall is hungry. He has some use, then. John took the words upon himself and did not let them push him. I will not swear fealty. I will not wear a pink cloak or your sigil or stand on your wall when you show yourself. I will not call you Lord so long as I wear black, though I will call you Roose. I will sit at your table if you ask as a guest, and I will take your guest right and keep it. I'll ask meat and barley and salted fish enough for 5,000 for the season's length. I'll ask nails and iron, kettles, lamp oil, pitch, and 1,000 good boots. I'll ask leather for 100 harnesses and 200 cloaks, wool for 1,000 more, and trapped furs if you have them. I'll ask for 20 blacksmiths to labor at the Shadow Tower and Eastwatch for a month each. That will be the price of any naming you care to do. Bold, said one of the Freys, a thin-lipped man who had shaved too closely. Arrogant, a watchdog that names his price, said another with an unctuous smile. How novel! It is not novel to ask that men who make much of honor return some portion of what they pretend to hold, said Manderley, and his smile was nothing at all. Roose had not moved since John began speaking. Now he tilted his head, a delicate angle, like a man examining a cut of meat. I can agree, he said, to most. I did not ask you to agree or disagree, John returned. I told you what was fair. That made someone laugh, one of the Freys, but it didn't matter which. The laugh failed to echo. The hall kept its own counsel, the dark beams watching, the hearth sending up its smoke in a pillar. You will take a cloak, Roose said pleasantly. Not mine, not pink. If you will spit at softness, I have gray enough. You will allow your name to be spoken at my council. You will allow mine to be spoken with it. You will stand where men can see you. Your wolf will stand beneath you. John could feel his heart beating, slow and heavy, an axe buried in a stump. I will stand where men can see, he said. I will not say the word you want. What I want, said Roose Bolton, is for men not to die of hunger while other men with bread and full bellies draw lines around words and call the lines sacred. I want the ironborn gone from my coastline. I want a winter that can be born and a spring that can be achieved. If a name annots a few closed hands, I will use it. If the name is yours, good. If not, I will find another. If you could find another, you would not have sent for me, John said. For the first time, a flicker of something moved behind Roose's eyes. No, he said, I would not. He rose without ceremony and without summons. Men moved because he did. The hall rearranged itself with the small and exact motions of a creature learning to fit into its own skin. A woman in a plain green gown came forward with a folded bundle in her hands. The wool was the color of snow under cloud, the fur collar dark and soft, the pelt of a marten, perhaps, or a sable. It was finer than anything John had worn since he had been a boy, and the sight of it made the child in him stir and the man in him grow harder. Roose did not touch the cloak. He did not offer it. He gestured with his pale hand, and the woman held it out the way a septa holds a book. You will wear this when you stand in my hall and when you stand in mine, Roose said, as if there were no difference. When you go back to your black, you will put it aside. You will not be seen with my sigil. I am not offering you my teeth, snow, nor a place inside my mouth. I am offering you a way to be looked at without spitting. And you will call me Warden, Jon said, because if they were to make a farce of names, he could at least name it himself. Roose's mouth made a line that might have been a smile in a different man. If that is the sound that brings meat north, he said. Warden. Ghost's breath feathered against Jon's hand. He thought of father again, of the way Eddard Stark had held a sword as if the steel had weight beyond its own. He thought of Robb once more, because he could not help himself. He thought of the wall and the men on it, and the thin stew and the bones they had boiled twice over. He thought of the old gods, and the heart tree at Winterfell, and the whisper of leaves in summer when there had still been leaves. He set his jaw. He nodded once to the woman, took the cloak, and placed it across his arm without putting it on. The fur warmed the cloth. The cloth leached the heat from his arm. He felt very clearly the line where it lay. Roose turned. My lords, he said, bring wine. We will sit. The Warden of the North is arrived. The phrase fell into the hall like something that had been thrown from a high window. Men stooped for it, each in his way. The phrase set their faces and pretended to accept what they could not speedily overturn. The Karstark's jaw worked. Manderly did not move at all, but his eyes appeared to brighten. The sour man with the rabbit fur did a small, unhappy dance with his seals, producing first the wrong one and then the right one and then the wrong, until he got it sorted. Jon stood where he was and felt the ground hold steady under his boots. They sat in a shallow crescent around the hearth, the heat of the fire reaching only as far as a boot toe. Wine came. Jon took ale instead. He left the cloak folded on his knee like a tamed animal that had not yet decided whether it would let itself be touched again. When the plates appeared, rounds of trencher bread soaked with gravy, hunks of pork with their own winter in them. He ate carefully and did not pretend not to be hungry. Men watch a hungry man to learn what his hunger will make him do. He let them see that food only made him quiet. When the talk resumed, it was workmanlike. The Ironborn were in force near the stony shore still, raiding through ice fog, their little black ships gliding like fish under the eyelid of the sea. The Frey's riders had taken losses trying to drive them out and had little to show but drowned men and a few sealskins. The White Knife was choked with floes. The great bulk ships lay 1 day outside and 2 days inside the harbor mouth at White Harbor, cursing and waiting for a wind that did not obey oaths. There were rumors from the Barrowlands that Flint riders had refused call and taken to the deeper hills. There were whispers from the Wolfswood that the trees had gone quiet in an unhelpful way. There was the winter everywhere, patient as an old beast, one that did not need to kill to win, only to stand. Jon spoke when he had something worth saying. He asked for names when someone said, they. He asked for distances and days and the exact number of loaves. He listened to the phrase and watched the place where their voices came from more than the words. He listened to Manderly when he was silent and when he spoke, and felt always the water-rotted log under the green moss and the hard, sound core within it. Send the blacksmiths, he said at the end. Send them 2 and 2 along the wall so that the small effort is made great by the length of it. Send the boots and oil and pitch. Send the kettles first. Steel shanks will take lists. Walton glanced up as if someone had cut a string inside him. You'll have meat from us, barrels of it. Once we've taken what the Shadow Tower has kept hidden in its cellars, and the wildlings' traps are working along the eastway. You'll have the wildlings themselves too, as men, if you prefer them to foxes. The king has not consented to savages at his table, said a Fry, shocked out of his unctuousness. The king has not consented to winter either, Jon said. Here we are. Roose's eyes did not change, but Jon felt them upon him as weight rather than gaze. We will speak of that again, he said. Privately, they did. After the council, the hall emptied like a cup poured slowly, leaving the last stubborn dregs reluctant to go. Manderly waddled off with a grunt and a little squeeze to Jon's arm that was not as soft as it looked. The phrase went with a brittle swish of cloth and a pair of half-bows. The Karstark nodded and took himself into the cold with the relief of a man removing a tight garment. Walton remained, and the Rabbitford clerk, Orton, his name turned out to be, a cousin to nobody of note, and 2 guards whose faces were as blank as a wall on the far side of snow. Roose had John walk with him through the inner ward. The evening laid itself across the snow, making it blue. The sounds of preparation, hammering, a wicker, the scrape of a shovel, came muffled and exact. The old smithy's roof had been patched with plank and tar. A dog sat in the door and looked out with the patience of pricked ears. The weirwood rose over it all, its red leaves the only loud thing in the world. "I will have the girl brought," Roose said as they walked. He spoke as if he were reading the sky, indifferent to whether the person beside him had eyes. "The Arya." John stopped. The cold made even that small motion crack. "You will have her brought," he said carefully, because repeating a man's words sometimes turned them to show their wrong side. "The realm will rest easier with a Stark made in Winterfell and a Stark man to look at," Roose returned. "I do not need your approval. I tell you because you will be asked to stand in a place where you can be seen. Puppet would not do. You will do. Give the men something to attach themselves to. The human hand is made to grasp. If it cannot find bread, it will take a banner." "My sisters are not banners," John said. The breath made a harsh sound leaving him. "And if you parade some girl out of a sack and name her, I will not stand anywhere near the dais when you do it." Roose's gaze slid to him and away. "I am glad of every place you do not stand," he said. "It is a sign that you know you can choose one and not another. I have no interest in deluding you about what is possible. You will take what you can and let me take what I will. Between us, the winter will find enough to break without breaking the wall first." They stood under the heart tree. John felt the way the wood had always felt, like an ancient listener. He put his hand on the trunk and felt the faint seep of sap. There were little icicles at the tips of a few leaves, and when the wind touched them they chimed almost imperceptibly. "When I was a boy," John said and stopped. It was a child's thing to begin so, and yet true. "When I was a boy, I thought this tree had eyes." "It has," said Roose. They were silent a while, long enough for the sky to remember stars. At last Roose said, "Do you hate me, Jon Snow?" "I do not think of you unless I must," John answered. "But when I must, I do not love you." Roose made a sound that might have been a breath only. "Good. Love is a leash. It will not hold in winter. Hate is a knife. Men lose their fingers using it. Indifference is a glove. Put it on. Keep your hands." Ghost pressed close to John's knee. The wolf's body was warm enough to make the air beside him feel colder. From somewhere near the back of the kitchens came laughter, brief and brittle, breaking like a thin plate. John let his fingers curl into the fur behind Ghost's ear and let the world settle. "I will stand where men can see me," he said. "I will be called what you choose to call me so long as there is meat on the carts that go north and oil in the lamps. If you bring a false girl to your dais and name her what she is not, I will not clap or smile. If you send a man to the wall with pink on his sleeve and he forgets what guest right is, I will cut his hand off and send it back by raven. These are my terms. They are not new. They do not change." Roose inclined his head. "I see," he said. "We have our bargain." They did not shake. Men who need hands for winter do not care to waste warmth on another man's palm. They walked back toward the hall with their breath pluming small and separate. Before they reached the threshold, a pack of dogs went past, noses down, men's boots clumping, laughter against the cold. John recognized none of the kennelmen. He did not see the bastard of Bolton among them, but he felt a prickle as though the man's absence were itself a shape. When the naming came, it came not with trumpets but with the slow spread of a rumor that hardened into ceremony because it had to, because men craved an edge to the bread of their days. The great hall was fuller, the banners hung higher. The cloak the woman had given him lay on John's shoulders, heavy and clean, the fur biting his neck a little. He stood where he had said he would, and when Roose's pale voice unfurled the titles, there was no oath asked of him and none given. The word Warden was spoken, born on a breath that did not cloud because the fire was too hot, and a murmur went around the room like wind in a field of winter wheat. Some faces opened, some closed. The Freys clapped their narrow hands. Manderley made no sound at all, but his fingers drummed a fat man's drumbeat against the arm of his chair. John looked past them all to the doorway. The world at the threshold was a slice of blue. The snow was falling again, fine as flour. Somewhere a rook called, or a raven, making the same ancient sound that had been made when men first built walls and called them safety. He held himself still until it was done. He held the fur at his collar in his hand until his fingers had the scent of it, and he thought of the wall and the men upon it and the empty spaces between their ribs. Later in the men's hall, with the carters talking of axles and the kitchen girls complaining about the cold that turned their knuckles into fruit pits, a boy he did not know brought him a piece of folded vellum with his own name outside in a stiff, exact hand. He opened it and found only a line and a little drawing. The line said, "The North remembers the taste of winter." The drawing was of a fish with its belly slit and a fat man's ring set inside for the curious to find. John let the paper sit on his knee. He did not smile. He closed his eyes and saw a different winter, a boy with a wooden sword chasing his brother under a sky good as milk, and the godswood in full leaf. He opened them again because there was work. In the days that followed, he did what he had promised. He spoke with the smiths and sent 2 men and then 2 more. He walked the storerooms and counted sacks with a man who turned pale when he coughed. He wrote letters to Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower and made a note beside each man's name who agreed to go north with provisions when the road was passable. He watched the kennel yard from the shadow beneath a stair and saw the bastard finally, laughing with his head thrown back as a dog leapt to take a scrap from his mouth. He went down into the crypts alone and found the place where his father lay, the air there close and damp and clean. He knelt long enough to feel his knees ache and his breath slow and the shape of his name change in his mouth. He did not put on the gray cloak outside the hall. He wore his black. Men saw. Some spat. Some nodded. One night, very late, he woke without having slept and went out into the first courtyard. Ghost rose out of the drift like a thing the snow had made for itself. A figure stood by the well, wrapped to the eyes, one hand bare and white as if it had been carved, the fingers long. "You wear 2 faces well," the figure said. The voice was a woman's, low and tired. The accent was northern. "Men are comforted by the sight of a Stark and emboldened by the sight of a brother. Be careful how you use both. Men who sleep with 2 blankets forget which one saved them." "Who are you?" John asked. The woman lowered her hood. Her hair was the color of old straw. Her cheekbones were broad and flat. Her eyes were not friendly and not unfriendly. They were the eyes of someone who had watched a fire and seen what it did. "Barbary Dustin," she said, "of Barrowton. I have come to see what is made in Winterfell tonight. I have watched men make many things here. Pies, widows, kings, bastards. I prefer pies. They do not pretend to be more than they are." "I prefer meat," John said. "Good," Lady Dustin said approvingly. "Bread is for men who can afford to pretend the world is safe." She glanced toward the hall. "You know this is a trap, of course." "Yes," John said. "And you will step into it." "Yes." "Good," she said again. "It annoys me when men pretend not to understand that sometimes the only way to close a trap is to stand inside it and hold the jaws until someone else can pry." She put her glove back on, slowly, carefully, as if each finger were a decision. "Be careful of the bastard," she said. "He likes to make art out of living things. Sometimes he improves them first." "I do not intend to be improved," John said. "No one intends," she replied. "That is the difficulty." She inclined her head. "Good night, Warden." "Good night," he returned, because the night would be what it would be whether they wished it to or not. When she was gone, he stood and watched the snow fall until his shoulders were a small line of hill under a drift. Ghost pushed his muzzle into John's hand, insistent, and John scratched between his ears. The wolf's eyes reflected what little light there was and threw it back colder. The sound of Winterfell at night was a different sound than by day. It had the same ingredients: boots, breath, wood settling, the mutter of men in their sleep. But they were arranged to make another tune, one that made his bones listen. He thought of the line he had drawn, and the one Roose had, and the greater line he could feel but not see, the one that ran from the top of the wall through all of them and into the woods beyond, and the sea and places no man had named. He thought of food and oil and boots. He thought of a girl that might be his sister and might not, holding her breath while someone dressed her hair to make it look like another girl's hair. He thought of the Ironborn with their painted eyes and their wet, salted pride. He thought of Stannis somewhere like a dull blade searching for a whetstone. He thought of the dead. He thought of the living. He thought of winter. When dawn came, it came without apology. A pale hand laid across the face of the world. Jon rose and went about his work. He was named. He was not sworn. He would take what could be taken and send it north and see how much of him was still on the wall when the season finally opened its fist. Snow gathered in the lee of the broken stair like flour in the fold of a baker's sleeve. Jon stood on the landing while frost wrote its white script along the railing, the wood swelling gently as if it were breathing. The yard below dragged itself awake by degrees. A boy chasing an errant dog with his mittened hands flapping like little flags. A carter cursing each wheel as if he might shame the wagon into moving through ice. A pair of old men by the forge bending their talk close to the coals, their faces made simple and honest by heat. The sky held to its first pale blush without deepening, as if unwilling to promise a noon. He went down with Ghost a pace ahead, the wolf treading light, toe pads whispering. Walton was already there, eating a slab of black bread that steamed where he tore it with his teeth. "Morning, my lord," he said out of habit, wiping crumbs into his glove with a primness that did not suit him. "Morning," Jon said, and did not correct him. The title slid off in private, but in the yard it served a purpose he could not throw away without breaking something else. "3 wagons ready? 2 with sacks and casks, 1 with iron," Walton replied. "Kettles, nails, and 3 crates of hinges from the Lord's stores. The smith says your men at Eastwatch will curse him with love when they see how sweet they swing." "Let them waste breath on blessing, then," Jon said. "We'll need a dozen horses with sense enough not to panic at a whiteout, and men who can tell a snow squall from a true storm. I don't want them eating the harness 2 days out." Walton grunted, which in him meant agreement, then frowned at the line of stables. "Horses we have. Sense we buy dear." "You've been buying it all your life," Jon said, and left the captain to his work. The kitchens were a kind of battle. Heat pressed the cold back at the doorway like 2 men straining breast to breast. Steam made the air soft and greasy. Tallow candles spattered on their own wax. The cook, Mally with the broken tooth, had 5 boys rotating oatcakes on a griddle with knives, each cake the size of a big man's palm and banded with brown. Jon took 2 when she shoved a plate at him because refusal meant a speech he didn't have time for. He ate standing, Ghost settled across his boots like a thrown pelt, his eyes closing and opening again with the patience of a creature whose business was waiting. "You'll waste away, Snow," Mally said, watching him do the opposite. "You're a long boy held together with string. Men in Winterfell like you blow away and get caught on the weirwood and the crows have a feast. I'm hard to catch," he said. He washed the oatcakes down with weak ale and wiped his fingers on a rag that had once been white and had since become many colors the kitchen understood. Mally watched him the way a mother watches a promising son, with suspicion. "You'll want the heel ends of the bread for the road wagons," she went on. "Not because the heel keeps, but because it holds together in the hand. Men will pluck at soft crumb and tell you it's not enough before their belly knows. Heel sits heavier, makes them shut their mouths." "Do it," Jon said, "and add pickled onions. A man feels he's eating something true if his eyes run." "You've got a mean streak," Mally said approvingly. "Good. You'll live." By mid-morning, the wagons were ready. The leather had been greased until it shone. The iron bands over the spokes looked wet. Men threw blankets that were more patches than blanket over their shoulders and squinted at the sky the way a mason squints at a wall, reading for failure. Jon walked the line and put a hand to each horse's muzzle, feeling the cold velvet. smelling the morning on their breath. He spoke to them low, not words, only sound. He had learned young that horses knew the difference between a man that wanted their power and a man who would ask and receive. The former made their eyes show white. These did not show white. That was enough. A boy with ears too big for his head took the lead rope of the first wagon and looked at John as if expecting to be named brave. "Keep your mittens dry if you can," John told him instead. "Shake the snow off at every stop. A wet hand is a stupid hand, and stupid hands lose fingers." The boy nodded once, solemn enough to make John feel like a bully, and clucked to the horse. They creaked out under the gate to a scant cheer from those whose work did not take them beyond the walls. John watched until the wagons were small and the men smaller. Ghost pressed his flank against John's knee. You could promise nothing to a winter road but attention. When he turned back, Wyman Manderley was watching him from a shadow that had not been there an instant before. Perhaps it had moved. The Lord had a knack for appearing where the air was warmer and finding a bench that did not creak no matter how he lowered his vastness. "Lord Wyman," John said. "Snow?" Manderley returned, his mouth full of something he made look like amusement. "I would walk with you where a man can breathe without freezing his tongue to his teeth." They took the covered passage toward the old armory. It still smelled faintly of iron and rat piss and something else. A sweet note, as if years of oiled mailings had soaked into the brick. Manderley moved with surprising lightness when he had to. His breath came easy. "The white knife is sending us its little teeth," he murmured. If I were a pious man, I would say the mother herself knits that river with ice so we cannot break it where we please." "You'll still get ships through," John said without asking. His certainty surprised him until he remembered the ring in the vellum and the fish slit to hide it. "When the wind turns." "When," Manderley agreed. "It will. Every wind turns. I tell my captains there is no such thing as a contrary wind, only an unready sailor." He looked down at John's face the way a father looks over a boy's head at a far horizon. "When the wind turns, Snow, I can run barges stacked with flour to Eastwatch and farther, if men with poles take the risk along flow. I can get you salted cod enough to make your men swear off dreams. But a man likes meat, as you and I know. Meat comes from land, and land has longer memory." "You mean the Umbers," John said, "and the mountain clans and the tall grasses that fed cattle that had done nothing wrong but be fat." "I mean everyone who tells me with a calm face that their granary was eaten by mice that have the appetites of kings," said Manderley. "Let the phrase ride from granary to granary and measure the droppings. I am a patient man. The North remembers in meat and time." He paused. "There will be a wedding." "Roose told me," John said. His voice did not reveal him, and still he felt revealed, as if the air could smell the salt coming up in him like tide. "They mean to drag the old girl out of her grave and dress another in her skin," Manderley said lightly. "Did you know porpoises shed their skins in strips? You would think the sea ate it clean. It hangs from them like drowned banners. But underneath is only porpoise." He leaned his elbow against the wall, close enough that his fur brushed John's sleeve. "They want you looking like a Stark," he added in his pleasant voice. "They want the hall to see your profile next to hers so they can teach their eyes to believe." "How far will you let your face go?" "As far as a hungry man's bread," John said. "Not a step beyond." "Good," whispered Manderley. "Let me have your face for one thing, then. When they name her, look bored. Boredom in a wolf's eyes will travel like gossip. And boredom can't hang men." John looked at him fully for the first time. The fat man's lashes were white at the tips with frost he had not brushed away. "Walk at my side when the phrase speak," Manderley went on. "The Riverland's lords do not understand our snow. It eats sound. They mistake that silence for obedience. I relish their mistake." He pushed off the wall and went waddling toward the light like a small mountain learning to slide. "Eat in my chambers tonight," he tossed over his shoulder. "No need to dress. No songs. Only soup." John considered refusing because it was safer to refuse everything. He caught sight of Ghost at the end of the passage, sitting neatly with his head tilted like a statue that had decided to incline. The wolf's ears made a question. John nodded once to the fat man's back. Ghost stood and fell in. They ate soup that had been a fish and then wasn't, and bread with the ends saved for men without the patience for crumb. Manderley drank a pale wine that had a friendly smell and made him friendlier. A servant made of elbows and good intentions stood in the corner with a towel and did not turn his head. They spoke like two men who might have been brothers if one had swallowed the other in the cradle. "You know it is not her," Manderley said for the third time before he would say anything else. John let the words blow through him and sting, because if he grew numb to them, they would have their way. "I cannot move now. I am watched like a deer with meat still on its bones. But men can watch and still be fooled, and fat men especially so. We have the advantage of appearing slower than we are." He took another drink and set the cup down carefully so that the table did not creak. "If she runs, if she shows sense, there are roads that belong to me. You will be asked to stand near her, Snow. You will hear a voice say a name you love, and a man you hate will put his hand upon that voice. I do not envy you that moment. If you look at me then, you will see me counting to keep my hands from doing stupid things." He smiled. "Count with me if you like. It steadies." "What would you have of me?" John asked. "Not your sword," Manderley said promptly. "Swords have done enough." He rolled a shoulder, making the fur creak. "Give me one nod and later food. Not just for the wall. For men with names who will not say them until they are safe." He leaned close, so close that John could see the pores on his nose and the thread of a capillary that broke like a river in spring. "When the wind turns, I will send barges men will mistake for whales. The white knife is my blood. It will do what I say when it can." Ghost shifted under the table, bumping John's boots with a knee that seemed too clever to be a joint. "There's a boy," John said, "with ears like cups. I told him not to wet his mittens. It was a trifle and he received it like a law. I'm more frightened by that than by Ramsay Bolton." "Good," said Manderley again, and chuckled softly until his belly trembled. "Fear that keeps men from pretending they are gods is wholesome. Eat more." John ate more because it saved argument. When he went back to the yard, the blue light had deepened into a bruised dusk that made everything look honest and tired. He passed the kennels, where the air was a thick stew of warm hide and sharp straw and the particular iron of urine. Laughter came from inside with the rhythm of men showing courage to themselves. He saw Ramsay for the first time as the man's shadow broke across the snow like oil. The bastard's face shone the way a dog sometimes does when it has found something it means to bury. "Brother," Ramsay said at once, spreading his arms with a theatricality that made the very air seem to roll its eyes. "Your wolf frightens mine. He stands so still. I prefer things that move and then stop moving." "Ghost is not mine," John said. "He is his own." Ramsay's smile did not diminish. It did not need to. "All beasts are ours if we are patient," he said. He had a scrap of raw meat pinched between finger and thumb. A rangy hound rose on its hind legs to take it, showing a patience that made it almost human-looking. Ramsay let the dog's teeth kiss his skin and laughed at the sting. "Father says we have a guest with old blood," he went on conversationally. "I like old blood. It stains everything better. Do you like stained things, Snow?" "I like clean," John said. "It shows what's missing." That made Ramsay laugh with more sincerity than anything else had. "You are droll," he said, genuinely pleased. "We will be good toys for one another. Will you come hunt with me? We can make the snow sing. I have men on a winter road and a forge that needs iron," John said. "Sing without me." He did not look at the hounds again. He did not look at the boy feeding them or the man holding the chain. He looked upward, to the angle where wall met tower, where swallows would have nested in another season. He walked away without hurry, ghost precise as a shadow beside him, and did not offer Ramsay his back as an insult or a favor. It was only a back after all. Let men make art out of what was not art. He slept poorly, as a man in a strange bed must, waking with the feeling that he had been told some important thing and had set it down and mislaid it. He woke in the middle of the black hour with Ghost staring at the door, a low sound in his throat like a harp string plucked very softly. John sat up, his hand going to the knife tucked under his pillow, and waited.
No footfall sounded.
The air did not change. After a while the wolf blinked, yawned without sound, and dropped his head back to his paws. John lay down again and did not sleep. The dark pressed against his eyes until memory bled through. Father's hand on his head, the smell of leaves in summer, Rob's laughter, the sound of ice cracking on the pond in their first true winter, a sound like the earth deciding. At gray light, a raven tapped the window with its beak. John let it in and took the paper off its leg while the bird turned its head and watched him with one gold coin eye. The handwriting was small, crabbed, and careful. We have taken a man with a tongue like a fish. He says the ironborn build smoke where the sea breathes. He says they talk to a drowned king and the king talks back. He lies for fear and speaks truth for fear. If the wind turns, I can come up the coast with 6 low boats, if I know where to hide a man. The white knife is partly ours and partly itself, like any creature. I will pay the part that is ours. Tell me where to be with men who will lift quietly. There was no signature. There was no need. John folded the paper into a square and put it on the table where it looked like any other paper. He let the raven hop to his forearm. The bird's feet were warmer than the air. Grain, John told it, and the bird bobbed as if understanding nothing and everything. The day was a litany of small weights, as days are when the large things have been decided. A hedge knight who had come north with the hope of finding a lord and had instead found honest work mended a strap under John's gaze and told a long story about a wooden spoon he had carried since childhood as if the spoon were a map to his heart. A woman with windburned cheeks stood in the yard and declared she would rather die than let her children walk behind a fry wagon to a hall where men mocked them with pies. She had 2 children, each with a different father and the same huge solemn eyes. John told her there was room in the old barracks for a family if she could lay a fire. She said, fierce, that she could lay a fire in wet, and he believed her. He took the meat count from a clerk who was the color of old paper and listened as the man coughed apologetically between numbers. He sent a letter to the Shadow Tower with a seal that was not his and then added a strip of leather through the wax to make the whole look accidental, as if a strap had fallen where it shouldn't and frozen there. Men sometimes trusted such error more than intention. By afternoon, the sky had forgotten how to be anything but gray. John went to the godswood alone and stood under the heart tree while the wind combed its red leaves. The old face did not seem to notice him, which was a kind of attention. He closed his eyes and by force remembered the sound of the stream in summer when the pool overflowed and ran like a laugh. It had been a thin sound then, a secret poured into grass. Now it was the deep breath of a sleeper who has learned he must sleep through pain. He set his palm to the bark. The cold traveled up his arm without hurry, took his wrist, and settled in his shoulder like a hand. "Father," he said, a little ashamed of the word and a little resentful and a little comforted. "They have put a word on me. I am carrying it because it brings bread. If there is any part of you left that cares for bread on a winter table, set your eyes on me and keep me from lies I cannot take back." The tree did not move. A raven clacked somewhere high and out of sight. Ghost drank from the pool and left his print on the ice skin before it melted behind him. Voices came through the trees like men walking on the bottom of a pond, distorted by distance and trunk and his own unwillingness to hear them. He recognized Roose's not by timbre but by the lack of it. Even masked, a lack is singular. He recognized another he had not heard before, keen and thinner, a woman's with education in it. He let them find him rather than stepping out of cover to show obedience. "My Lord Warden," Roose said without color, as if option had been removed. "Queen Celis has sent a letter with a man who believes that words make him warmer. He says your wall is a sanctuary that would prefer to be a court, and he bears you a sentence to kneel in the snow and call it crown." John turned. The woman beside Roose wore gray that had been made fine with thought rather than coin. She had the long face of a lady and the temper of a septa who disliked the sound of laughter. Her cloak was trimmed with something that had been white once and had since gathered stories. "Meliana Fisher," she said, as if introducing a third party. I am the Queen's reader. Her Grace holds court at the Night Fort. The name made John's skin shift on his bones. The Night Fort stones carried old hunger. Her Grace holds court in a ruined hall full of tales, he said. She may hold court where she likes. We will hold a gate. Uncharitable, Miliana said primly. Her Grace speaks for the king. Lord Stannis speaks for himself. They both speak for fire. She held out a scroll with a seal that had been broken and then patched with care. Jon did not take it. She read instead, to Jon Snow, called Warden of the North by those who need a word they remember while they chew, from Celis of House Florent, by the grace of all good things, Queen. We require you at the Night Fort to give an account of the North and of the resources stolen by evildoers who pretend to ally with Winter. Your presence will give peace to good men and strike terror in the hearts of the false. We will receive you before the full moon. We will ratify what is honest and cleanse what is not. Bring your wolf, that we may judge a miracle for ourselves. Roose's mouth did not move at the last line. His eyes flickered, the smallest possible admission of amusement. Jon listened to the silence after the words with greater attention than he had given the words. Somewhere in that silence a kettle lid clanged, very far away, and a child cried once and then stopped with that jolt of obedience only fear can teach. I will not leave Winterfell while wagons are on the road, Jon said. And I do not answer to queens in ruin for asking bread. The wall takes gifts by old law. If the queen wishes my count, I will send a clerk with a good hand and better numbers. Miliana looked as if she had tasted a herb that cured and insulted in the same mouthful. Her Grace will be cold, said Roose gently, and that shut her. She will be as she is. We will send a clerk, he added to Jon, as if it had been his thought, with numbers that make our enemies certain of our fairness. Miliana shifted to face Jon fully. The Queen will forgive insults when she sees what you carry in your name, she said. She will rejoice to legitimize you if you kneel to the fire. The Lord of Dragonstone offered once. He offers again. Jon felt the old pull, familiar as the ache of a half-healed wound. He had turned this stone before and found nothing under it but worms. The memory did not make the turning easier. I am sworn, he said, and made the two words a shelter. I will be sworn tomorrow. Roose's eyes were as pale as the pool's skin. Go back to your queen, Lady Reader, he told Miliana, pleasant. Tell her the North listens when spoken to politely. He paused, as if choosing whether to draw a thorn. Tell her Winter reads no letters. Miliana made a small stiff bow and went, offended in a way she enjoyed. When her gray hood vanished between the yews, Roose said, There will be another letter. There always is. You will continue to wear your cloak and not swear. Between those two rocks we will move the cart. You do not fear Stannis? Jon asked. I do not fear men who believe that their righteousness burns bright enough to see by, Roose said. They are blind whenever it suits the world. He stood very close to Jon, the two of them the same shape and height and posture and nothing else, and murmured, When the girl comes, even your face will be hungry. Teach it manners. The girl came with flurries. First rumor, then a smell, then a small procession that tried to look large by moving slowly. The hall was draped with gray and black in a way that made the light from the hearth seem theatrical. Roose sat not quite at the high end of the table and let the room fill toward him like water behind a weir. The phrase swarmed. Manderley took up space. Barbary Dustin folded herself into a shadow near a pillar as if she had always belonged there and had merely stepped aside earlier to let men misunderstand her absence. They brought the girl in with a hand at either elbow and a wreath of winter berries in her hair that had been chosen by some clever woman who understood that red and white make a story. Jon did not move. He let the hit of her face strike him and pass through him. She looked nothing like Arya. That fact tried to become something inside him. A rush, a relief, a rage, and he did not let it move from trying into being. He had known it would be so. He let his eyes go flat. He heard Manderley counting under his breath, softly, almost like a prayer. 1, 2, 3. Jon joined him at 5 and breathed along. 6, 7. The girl's mouth trembled and became still. Perhaps she was counting too. Ramsay stood at her side, glowing like a piece of iron that has been brought to the edge of orange and flattened just enough not to sing. "Lady Arya of Winterfell," Roose said with a correctness that neither apologized nor dared. "My son's lady, my Lord Warden's sister." His glance slid across Jon's face and away as if the eye did not care for action scenes. Men cheered because that is what men do when the heir tells them to. Jon kept his face bored. He let his eyes go beyond the girl to the doorway where the cold lived, as if his thoughts had wandered to the state of the sky. Ghost did not rise. He did not growl. He lay with his head on his paws and his eyes half shut and looked like an expensive rug someone had put down for a lord. He was none of those things, and Ramsay knew it. Jon could feel the bastard's gaze on the wolf like a hand searching for a throat. The feast was meat and sinew and flour made into shapes that tried to resemble better years. Mummers appeared, briefly, their bells muffled and their antics seeming cruel by accident. A singer took the corner by the buttery door and sang of Eamon, the Dragon Knight, with a voice that wanted to be clean but had been smoking all its life. The girl stared into her wine cup as if something might grow there to advise her. Ramsay's hand sat on the table too near her hand. Roose did not touch anything more than necessary. Halfway through a dish that called itself venison and had a sailor's taste of brine, a folded scrap appeared under Jon's fingers the way a leaf sometimes falls on a man's shoulder from a tree that seemed asleep. He did not look at the hand that laid it there. He did not glance up at faces. He put the paper in his sleeve as if he were adjusting a cuff. He waited long enough to raise a cup and drink and put it down without spilling. Then he excused himself to no one particular and went by a quiet route he had already measured to a side room that smelled of crushed rushes and old smoke. The note had been written in a child's hand forced at speed into what the writer believed a lady's. It made his throat hard. "I am not she. Help me." There was no more. There did not need to be. The letters leaned and slanted. A newer cut bled slightly into the old ink in one stroke as if the pen had been jabbed. Jon folded the note again and put it back in his sleeve. He stared at the wall and waited for anger to decide to be useful. The wall did not say anything enlightening. He went back to the hall and sat. The men had not changed their shapes in his absence. The food had grown cooler. Ghost's eyes tracked him and then closed again with elaborate disdain for the human drama. Later, when the hall had become a series of pools of light and beer had made courage cheap, Barbary Dustin lifted a goblet in Jon's direction that could have been greeting or insult and left without her cloak. Jon went to the same old passage where the armory talked to itself at night. She was waiting with the winter on her hair and a look in her eyes he would have called pity if he believed she would allow herself that. "A girl told me she was not who she was," Jon said, because he did not think naivete would turn a trap into a refuge. Barbary tipped her head. "A boy once told me he was a lord and he turned out to be a boy. Truth is a habit, not a revelation." She stepped closer until he could smell rabbit on her and something sharper, like a basket room where leather lives hung drying. "If she runs, you can make winter smaller for her for one night. You cannot make it spring. Do not try to turn your cloak into a banner today. Keep it a blanket." "How long have you been speaking like that?" Jon asked without humor. "It sounds like sense, and I distrust sense." "I am old," she said. "Old women learn to season sense so men don't spit it out." She reached, quick, and tugged a thread loose from the hem of his sleeve. "There. They will see that and say you are growing shabby with care. It will buy you a kind of credit." She looked toward the hall. "The bastard has not yet decided whether to murder artistry or create it. If he marries the girl in you, we will all have more trouble than this." The wedding itself was a tired ceremony made important by hunger. The Septon's voice had a brittle echo in it, as if words could be glass. Men watched because watching occupied their eyes while their bellies occupied their minds. Jon stood where he had promised he would stand, not on the dais, not in its shadow, in a place where a man might be mistaken for a column if you were not paying attention. The girl said the words and swallowed once. The bastard smiled and laid his hand on her hair as if testing grain for damp. Roose's eyes remained almost clear. Men banged spoons. The world meant to go on in some fashion. At full dark, the wind rose in a way that had nothing to do with ceremony. Pushed snow into new places and made old places unfamiliar. The sounds in the courtyard changed. Rope creaked differently. A door lifted off its swell and bit back. John left the end of the hall as if going to piss and took a turn that could have been accident. Ghost left a smear of moonlight in his wake. A shape the color of smoke detached itself from a buttress. Theon Greyjoy's face had once been a sign and was now a map and poorly drawn. Both meanings were useful. His eyes had the look of a man who had been fed more fear than bread and still had teeth for bread. "Don't speak," he said and spoke. "She asked me. I don't know why anything asks me anything. She wants to run. She's not your sister. She says she'd rather die than be his wife. She says she won't die yet if there's a door." He swallowed. His throat clicked like ice settling. "I know 3 doors. Only one does not open into dogs." "Who told you to tell me?" John asked quietly. "No one," Theon said, and laughed without amusement. The sound a thing abandoned in a yard. "Everyone. Your wolf told me with his eyes. She told me with her hands and the way they shook and then stopped shaking. Roose told me by not looking at me. The snow told me by falling where it did. Because snow always falls to hide truth, and this time it fell to show it." He took a breath that sounded too big for his chest. "Tonight, or never." John stood very still and let the seconds arrange themselves into a rope. If he pulled too quickly, it would burn his hands and break. If he did not pull, the knot would grow fat and hard and wait for his neck. He could feel the weight of the gray cloak upstairs in his chamber the same way he felt a weapon on the opposite side of a wall. Its presence, its potential to be used by someone else if he did not use it first. "Not the kennels," he said. "Not any door men know. Tell her to put snow in her boots to keep them from squeaking where it's iced. Tell her to tie her hair like a boy if there's time. Ghost will be where the wall touches the burned tower. He will smell her, and he will not tear her throat. He will tear any other throat. I will walk to the well. I will not look behind me. You won't run with her?" Theon's voice held accusation without hope enough to make it sting. "I do not need to run with her to make the snow notice her less," John said. "When my brother and I were boys, we walked different paths in the same wood and came out at the same break. One of us had seen a fox and one of us had seen a mushroom. Both of us had seen a tree. There is only one tree in certain woods. Ghost will be the tree. Tell her." Theon nodded like a man remembering how to nod. He melted back into stone. John went the other way and found himself under the night like a man under a river. He walked with a care that wanted to become caution and refused to let it. He stopped once to put his hand to Ghost's side. A brief press. The wolf was a furnace banked, a low heat he did not waste. Snow needled his face and then gentled, as if reconsidering. The well was a black mouth. He stood by it and looked into it as if called to count his own teeth. A cough sounded behind him, a little thing, a woman's, and stifled because it had to be. He did not turn. "Walk," he said, as if to the well, and walked. Footsteps followed. They were deft in their fear, quick and then checked, then quick again. He could hear another pattern beneath them, a man's careful and trying not to be. The snow spoke under their feet with soft cruelty, the sound of secrets under blankets. John went along the inner wall, through the shadow that lay unspilled by the feast's light, past the old granary window where a pane had cracked in a perfect spiderweb that made beauty out of want. He wanted to look. Every bit of him wanted to look. He did not. A man turned by his wanting becomes something else and loses his shape in the game. They passed beneath the burned tower. Ghost's outline appeared and vanished as if carved from cloud. The wolf slid away ahead of them and stopped and moved again, always just at the edge of hand's reach, always tempting and refusing to be touched. John heard the breath behind him catch once, and a little sound that he recognized from childhood. Teeth clicking against teeth in cold to stop them chattering. He remembered Arya making the sound and biting her lip until it bled rather than let Sansa hear and be superior. He did not stop that memory. It made him move smoother. At the postern that had been bricked and then reopened and then concealed by clever men who liked to measure their cleverness against other men's eyes, a shape detached from darkness and grew a mouth. Snow. A voice hissed that wanted to be faithful and had run out of places to put it. If you make me guilty of something worth the rope. Worth it, John said, and passed so close to the man that their elbows spoke a word in the old tongue of bone. They came out where the world was a different cold, more honest and less made of men. The wind walked where it would and left no accomplices. Snow had filled the ruts men had made that afternoon. The girl's breath squeaked and then was caught, mastered. Theon's breath rasped in time with it, foolishly, as if trying to match it into invisibility. Ghost went ahead into the white and his whiteness became pattern instead of animal. It was a useful lie. Men see pattern and do not look for the thing that made it. John went to the gate they had agreed without agreeing would be the one and met a shadow that could only be Walton. The man's mustache was a line of frost. He did not move to block. "My lord," he said cheerfully to the darkness beside John, and added no more. Later, men would remember he had said "my lord" to someone and would not be sure which lord he had meant. He stepped aside with a careful fool's shuffle that would look like clumsiness to anyone who did not know his pride in his feet. If he saw the two shapes slide by him, he saw nothing that could be sworn to. The white beyond the gate took them and made them simple. A tall thing, a shorter thing, a wolf moving like a hope men will not name. John stood until his knees began to carry the kind of pain a man can rely on. He closed the gate with hands that did not tremble because trembling would have been a confession to the wrong God. He went back through the yard at the pace of a man who needs to piss and does not care who knows. He found the feast in the same shape he had left it. He stood where he had stood before. He counted. Manderley counted his own count. Barbary Dustin followed with hers like a piper guiding madmen over a cliff whose bottom she had measured. The screaming began in the kennels, far away, very small. Ramsay's smile opened of its own accord at the first note, and only afterward did his face learn what had happened to merit it. He stood so quickly his chair fell, and someone caught it before it struck the ground because habit is quicker than thought. Roose did not move at all. Men ran. Men always run toward noise because noise tells them who they are to one another. John did not run. He walked with the pace he had used for the gate. He made his face bored. He stepped into the snow that had fallen inside the kennel yard because the wind does not recognize walls, and he let his eyes fall on the first dog and the second and the third. Their bodies, their mouths, their silence. A handler sobbed without making sound. His mouth opened and shut, the noise swallowed by the cold. "She ran," Ramsay said foolishly, truly, angrily, joyously, in each voice fighting the others. "She ran." He looked at John as a man might look at a mirror he has found in the wild and does not trust. "You were at table," he said hoarsely, to tell himself a story of his own virtue. "You were at table." "I was," John said. "The venison was salt." He let the rest do what the rest always does, whatever suits it. Orders were given. Lanterns became comets in the white. Men cursed the way men curse when their own error bites them and pretend they curse fate. Roose spoke very little and his voice never rose. Theon Greyjoy was nowhere. Walton's mustache continued to hold frost. Manderley chewed a mouthful of nothing with deep pleasure in a corner where no one thought to look for pleasure. Barbary Dustin was a shadow on a shadow, and something like satisfaction sat beside her a careful inch away where it would not embarrass her. John went back to the godswood and put his hand on the bark of the old tree and let himself breathe like a man saved from drowning who does not yet want anyone to see he is alive. The night crawled toward morning the way a wounded animal crawls to a hole. Men came back in twos and fours with eyes too wide, saying there was nothing. There were tracks and then there were none. There was a river of white lions that ate signs. A boy had fallen and not risen, and his mates had stepped over him because there would be time later to carry him, and later had refused to arrive. The dogs ran and then sat with their tongues blue. Ramsay ran and then laughed with his head down as if the laughter had spilled and he were trying to catch it back. Roose looked at the pale sky as if it might explain itself. No one asked John a question because the questions were too large and too dangerous and too near to the answers men did not want. He slept 2 hours with Ghost sprawled against his legs, a weight heavy enough to convince him he was not floating away into blank. At dawn, a raven found him on the wall. He had gone there by habit in his mind. His feet followed with a relief that shamed him and relieved him further. The bird had a scrap on its leg that had not been tied by a man used to tying scraps. The knot was good in a way that suggested women who had braided hair before a journey. Safe for now. Not Arya. Thank you. Forgive me. The word forgive turned slowly in him like a blade under water. He did not know who she meant to forgive or for what. He did not know whether it was meant for him. He did know that men must live with words whose subjects they cannot find. He took the scrap, folded it, and held it against the cold stone as if pressing a fevered brow to a cool cloth. Ghost lay with his head over John's boots, looking toward where the white becomes sky. Below, Winterfell went on behaving like a place that was not a story. Men shat, fires were lit, bread rose and then fell and was eaten. A woman cursed a splinter as if it were an enemy soldier. A clerk coughed and wrote 7 instead of 8 and then scratched it out carefully as if an enemy might notice and attack the error. John watched smoke lift into the thin air and disappear where the cold was stronger. He imagined the 2 small shapes sliding into a world that did not intend to carry them but could not shake them off yet. He imagined Ghost's body in their memory, white and silent and choosing. Roose came up to him as if he were a fog. Men did not notice him until he was beside them, which was his art. He stood with his pale eyes on the world and his pale hands inside his sleeves. It is interesting, he observed, how often men who grow up under one name can hear the pitch of another. This one, Theon Greyjoy, has been told so many names that he no longer knows which one burns. I do not like such men. They strike at the wrong throats out of habit. Habit is the strongest part of any man, John said. It saves him and kills him with the same hand. Roose considered that as if tasting a stew. I will need your face today, he said finally. Men will look at you and decide what they will admit to themselves. If you look angry, they will be craven. If you look clean, they will be shamed. If you look bored, they will decide they have seen everything there is and sleep. He turned his head the smallest degree. Be bored, Warden. I am, John said, and to his surprise found the word true. He was so tired of men. Good, Roose said, and stepped away and was gone in 3 steps without haste. The days that followed were work with a skin of rumor pulled tight over them. The note from Queen Celis came again, with more words and fewer cents, and John sent numbers back that were more true than men deserved, a gift of his distaste for lying when it made more work later. The barges came, flat things with bold men at their poles and the river in their shoulders, and slithered along the ice's lip like frogs that had decided to be fish. Manderley's men unloaded casks while saying the names of their dead softly to themselves with every lift, as if giving back a portion of weight to ghosts. The Ironborn smoked fish on beaches and were driven like gulls and returned like gulls. A hunter brought in a white fox whose head was too big for its body. Mally skinned it and hung the pelt where the light would not turn it yellow and bullied a boy into scraping the skull clean for a trophy she would give to a man who'd been kind 3 times running. Barbary Dustin went to the kennels with a strip of raw beef in her hand and fed the meanest bitch piece by piece while looking the animal in the eye. Ramsay rode out, returned, rode out again, returned with a look that suggested he had destroyed small beautiful things because that was all there was and it had not satisfied him. Men came to John to ask him for justice in matters such as a broken wheel that had been poorly made by a cousin, a pail of oats that had gone missing and must have been stolen by fry layabouts who had only looked at it, a woman whose daughter had been spoken to too long in a stable by a man who had nothing but good intentions, a scuffle in a line for bread. He gave them answers that did not make good stories and therefore were true. He made a boy stand with the wheelwright and watch a wheel be made with the proper heart so the boy would never again call a spoke a rib and think it clever to be wrong. He had the fry layabout tested with a sack of oats put where a man would be a fool to steal it. The man did not steal it and went white when he realized he had been suspected, and John apologized where men could hear him because apologies that are not heard do not correct a world. He told the mother to make her daughter comb her hair in the open. "The man will talk to another girl tomorrow," he said, and the mother nodded because she had lived long enough to stop being surprised by tomorrow's cruelties. At night, he walked the walls and listened. The wind makes a choir out of stone. Each crenel has its note. He began to know which stones complained like old men and which sang like boys and which hummed with the patience of women who have decided to live very long and are past pretending to themselves that men drive history. He stood under the heart tree until he felt his own heart slow to the tree's time. He wrote letters to his brothers on the wall that never said what he wanted because what he wanted would have made their hands shake and spill lamp oil. He bled a finger on a burr in the cloak's collar and took grim pleasure in the momentary stain on the fine white fur. He missed Arya like a man misses his own old clumsiness and forgives it in memory because he cannot afford the luxury of forgiving himself today. On the 4th night after the girl ran, on the 7th by a different counting, a ranger from the Shadow Tower reached Winterfell with frost in his beard and a letter under his shirt. He had lost 2 toes and a friend on the road and spoke with the cheerful obscenity of men who have decided it is better to defeat death by laughing than by fighting honorably and losing. "They're moving at the wood's edge," he said with his foot up and a cup of hot wine in his hand, after someone had counted his toes out loud as if the numbers would keep them company. "White shapes, not wildlings. Wildlings shit and there's no shit where these pass. You hear the trees complaining like women with old men on them. You hear the ice speak. Every time you tell yourself you will turn and look, and every time you don't because you remember a story you heard when you could still pretend that stories were meant to frighten and not warn." John's hand had broken into a sweat against the cup he did not remember picking up. "How far?" "Not far enough to be someone else's problem," said the ranger. "Far enough that men here in this warm house can finish their meat." He grinned to show he did not begrudge them meat. "I've seen worse," he added, which might have been true and might have been a gift. John wrote to Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower with his jaw clenched in a patient clench that made his teeth ache. He went to Roose with the letter and found the man reclining in a chair that had been made for someone heavier and belonged in a different house, and wished nothing in particular for him beyond bread that had the agreement of his stomach and throat. "They come," John said simply. "They always come," Roose returned, as if winter were a creditor who had discovered there was less to take than expected. "You will have your oil and your iron and your boots. You will have men with eyes that know the difference between something right and something wrong. If you need more, you will tell me before you need it, and I will pretend to be surprised." He looked up. "Do not die on my steps," he added lightly. "It will make me look careless." "I'll die where it will ruin someone else's day," John said. "Consider it," said Roose, and returned to the page he was not reading. That night, a storm came out of nowhere and everywhere and made the world intimate. The walls of Winterfell became the size of a man's arms. Men walked from door to door with hands brushing stone, to remind themselves where they ended. Trenchers ran out of themselves and became lines to be held by fingers. The sound of the kennels vanished, which was somehow worse than their noise. John sat with Ghost in a room with no fire and listened to the white thing press itself against the walls like an enormous ear. He slept at last because even fear must be paid for with sleep. He woke before the gray hour to the feeling of quiet that is not peace but the exhaustion after a rage. He rose, gathered help around him like a coat that did not fit, and went into the yard to find men counting snow. A drift had given way beside the old holdfast and slid like dough. A door had been buried on the east side and dug out by an old man with a shovel who had kept time with a curse. A boy had been lost and then found asleep with a dog, both of them steamed dry by each other. Barbary Dustin had come out in the night and walked the wall once without anyone seeing her, because women know how to go where men will not waste suspicion. Manderley had sat at a window and stared and smiled. He did not say why. One of the Freys died that night, quieter than his life allowed for. He had slipped while pissing from a parapet in a way that made mockery seem easy and wisdom seem cheap. Men pretended to be solemn. Manderley was solemn without pretending. Ramsay was openly disappointed by the lack of artistry. The storm washed the tracks away that had pointed in any direction beyond the walls. If men had wanted to follow, they could not have followed. If men wanted to tell themselves they could have followed, They did so and made themselves believe it. John did not waste belief on that. He went back to work because work is the weight that keeps a man on the earth when he is tempted to become wind. 3 days later, a little girl with a red scarf came to him with a message in her hand and a hot stone in the other wrapped in wool. The stone steamed faintly in the cold. She held it out to him as if it were a kind of greeting. He took it and kept it in his palm and let the heat go up his arm and remind his heart of blood. The note was written in a different hand than the first, a clerk's hand that had been taught by a river. It said simply, "The white knife turns tomorrow, for 3 days only. The wind will be ours. Count 3 barges under gull-belly sails. Do not count the 4th. It will not be seen." John showed it to Manderley, who blinked as if he were surprised by his own cunning and pleased to meet it. "Gull-belly sails," he mused. "That's what I get for letting my grandson name things. Very well." The barges came as promised. 3 fat, clumsy children who knew their way home. The 4th did not, and that was the point. It slid to a place where a man had once pushed his sweetheart into the river and then changed his mind and pulled her out by the hair. No one stood on that bank now. No one watched the 4th barge be lighter than it had been when it left. No one saw a shape go into the reeds like a small god that the world had forgotten how to feed. Men saw only the 3. John stood on Winterfell's inner wall and stared toward the place where the river ran out of his sight. He could feel in his finger bones when a boat climbed a swell. He had known that since he was a boy and had never known why until now. Ghost pressed close enough that the fur at his flank tickled the hair through John's trousers. Snow blew into his lashes and crusted there and melted with the slow resignation of things that will have to start again. "Warden," said a voice behind him. "Manderley. We sent 2 extra sacks of onions by mistake," the fat man said blandly. "Mistakes do happen. I find myself forgiving those," John said. "Good," Manderley replied as if instructed. He stood with John in the long quiet that followed. "The wind will turn again," he said. "They always do. Be here when it does." "I will," John said, and believed it because belief is sometimes a hand you put on your own shoulder and hold there until your knees are steady. When night came, stars showed like pinholes pricked in paper, and the cold was honest for once, without tricks. John walked to the God's Wood again by a path his boots had taught themselves. He put his hand on the tree without asking permission. He breathed in and out and let the world be the size of his lungs. A rustle sounded. He did not start. It was only Barbary Dustin, who could not help seeing what needed seeing. She came to stand beside him and did not pretend not to need the tree as well. "He will never forgive you for boring him," she said softly, and John knew she meant Ramsay. "He wants to be frightened. He wants to be surprised. He will try to make you scream." "I have screamed enough," John replied, surprising himself by the truth of it. "Do you know what the worst thing is? When the scream keeps company with you when you are quiet. When you find you need it to know you are awake." Barbary looked at him in profile in the dim. "If you learn to be bored with your own screaming, you can live a long time," she said. "Women know how." He smiled without mirth. "Teach me." "No," she said, not unkindly. "You teach yourself. Women have had to." The wind made the leaves whisper in their red voices. Somewhere a dog found something worth telling the dark about and told it. 3 sharp barks, and silence resumed as if it had been waiting politely. John stayed until his feet stopped understanding what ground was, and then stayed a little longer. He thought of a girl who was not his sister and had the sense to be herself in the worst possible place. He thought of a boy who had once been his friend and had been made into something else and had remembered how to nod. He thought of a fat lord who could count to steady his hands. He thought of a man with pale eyes who called indifference a glove, and of the dead who might very soon require more of his attention than any living lord could demand. He thought of grain and boots and kettles and lamps. He thought of the wolf's wood and the white knife and of queen's letters and king's silences, and of the wall standing far away and still, harsh and patient as a father you cannot please. He thought, "I will be where men can see me, and I will make them see what I choose." Ghost leaned his head against John's hip for a time, then moved away with a purpose John could not immediately see. The wolf drifted through the understory with that particular care that meant he did not want to be heard and could not help being seen if he desired it. John followed without appearing to follow. They came to the edge of the pool where the ice had grown thin under a fall of twigs. Ghost lowered his muzzle and drew up a smell as if it were a thread he could pull. He huffed once in a way that in another creature might have been humor. John lifted his eyes and found, at last, what the wolf had wanted him to see. Across the pool, under the shadow of a limb, something white stood for one still heartbeat. A shape like a man and not a man, like a word in a language he had heard in childhood and forgotten to translate. It did not move. It did not need to. The cold curled tighter under his skin, as if the world were clenching. Ghost did not growl. He stood and watched. After a while, the shape was not there. John let out a breath he had not known he was holding until his body asked reclaiming. He put his palm to the tree to be sure of his name. He turned very slowly and walked back through the snow with Ghost a pace behind and to the left, exactly where a friend walks when you have nothing left in you but the habit of putting one foot before the other and pretending it is a march. In the hall, men snored in 100 keys and a fire made the old dangerous music of settling logs. John lay down in his clothes. Sleep came for him like a dog you have not fed and still trusts you. He took it in his arms and did not dream that he could remember, which was its own gift. The night lifted, inch by inch, the way a great weight lifts when enough men get their hands under it and decide together they can bear anything for another breath. The morning that followed was blue as a bruise and honest as a cut. John rose. There were numbers to be added and grumblers to bring to heel and a letter to write to a queen who did not understand walls, and a note to send to a fat man by a river, and a message for brothers upon a world that had chosen to become a weapon. He set his jaw and began.